1, 2.
The 30s, 60 years ago. There aren't too many people alive who remember those wonderful days before World War II. And as I'm sure everybody has said many, many times, the world changed with World War II. The 30s were still in those, starting with 1929, even though it was before or the time of the Great Depression. We didn't seem to feel it. Whether we were, certainly by those standards, we were not considered rich, but we definitely did not suffer during the Depression. Life went on very much the same. I continued at college. We continued to have two live-in help. As I say, it went on very comfortably. And we went to the island every summer, as my mother always opened it about Memorial Day, the end of May, and she came home sometime, well, the middle of September or so. That little building is what we knew as Holikai. As you can see, the water was incredibly high that year. We had to have catwalks on the docks and piles of rocks to keep the docks from kind of floating away. You can see, you look down the cut, see how high it is? Now, of course, at that time, we had 3 slips in the main boathouse. Well, let's back up and see. That is my Aunt Margie, actually a cousin, and she loved to paint. She always wore pants, either sailor pants or white knickers, and she painted all summer long, canoes, furniture, buildings. You can see the water's almost up to the top of the seawall. We were great canoeists in those days. There is what was known as the Little Bear, and that just seems to be another punt. But look at all the canoes. Now here is the inside of the Temagami boathouse, and you take a look at what funny boats we had then. That's a Thompson, and there is one of the Temagamis. See the long bow? It was one of those funny old ones. I think that's the Temagami Third. This is coming up the walk from the tennis court. The walk is still there to what has always been known as the big house. And you see this part that's sticking out. That's where the grown-ups would retire eventually to have cocktails. And little people were not allowed. They could press their noses to the screen, but they were not allowed to come in during cocktail hour. And this side of the house, that's the front door. Oh, there's the bungalow, just as it, well, practically as it is. There was no kitchen along the side in those days. It was just 2 bedrooms and a living room and a big porch. But you could see it looks just the same. You can't see now. We'd enlarged the front window. That used to be the artist Remington's studio, and so it looked north for the north light that all artists wanted. And you could see how big the big house was. It's always a little makes rocky things when you get out on the water and try to take pictures. We were at the island, as I say, every summer for about 3 months. In the big house, there were 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor and 2 big ones on the 3rd floor. And I keep getting the years a little mixed up. The bed there is Aunt Cy, when she was about 15, rowing in the skiff, T.I. skiff. And this person in the foreground is my friend Jean McMillan Jones, who was my dear friend from Wells College. And it was she and her husband Hugh Jones and their children who used to come every summer for a week or so, year after year. That is Tony Mankel as about a 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy in the new Thompson boat with an outboard. Tony was pretty proud because it was his boat. Look at the size of the engine. It's so little, it didn't, you'd sneeze at it today. Oh, he's going to tow it. Now that is Chucky Benton. And if you get another, the Bentons lived in Ogdensburg. Oh, that's Jim Rendell, I think, who is my broker now and has retired. That is my cousin Tom Menkle and my cousin Margot. We share, and that is Aunt Si and the striped top. These are the Menkles, and leaning over Margot's shoulder is Louis Benton, whom she later married. The Bentons lived in, that's Bud Chapman, and he was the Conant's lawyer for many years. They lived up the river on the Chapman Island, and that is me, Adelaide Best. Adelaide Morgan Best. Well, I'm not in the picture there, with my hair and my eyes. Yes. Buddy Chapman, Little Rendell. I'm not sure who that one at the right there. That is me being silly. We were all terribly silly. Movies were very new in those days, and nobody wanted to have their picture taken. That's Adelaide, yes. And that is my cousin Margot, who, believe it or not, was considered very beautiful and was May Queen at Wells College. She was a year ahead of me. We shared the island with the Menkles for many, many years. That's Cycona, yes. This is a sport that we gave up after somebody got hurt. The ends of the poles were padded, and there was a nail in one that hit somebody once. The idea was, of course, to knock the other guy off the canoe. That's another one of the many sports at one of the regattas that were held early on. It took a certain amount of balance to stand on the gunnels and whang away at people. I had almost thought that since hardly anybody will recognize these people, that I would just give you a running commentary of life at the island in those days. But I find myself interrupting a little bit. My cousin Margot. After I graduated from college, which was in 1932, friend of Dee Dee Ward, a friend of Margot's. Here, that is the old sailboat called the Peanut that we had for many years. It was a catboat, a big, unwieldy catboat. That is Aunt Margie, who was actually my father's niece. There was a skip in generations there. And as you can see, and that is my mother standing in the white dress at the back. Tony Menkle, little Tony Menkle with a cap on here, his brother Tom, who was just my age. I don't know who or why we are doing that. But Aunt Margie was evidently making some repairs to the Peanut. When Tom and I was 12 and he was 13, one of my earliest memories was being caught in a white squall. That's Aunt Si. Being caught in a white squall in the Peanut. And Tom, being small and slender, not very heavy, and I was pretty skinny too, he was trying to wrestle the big tiller, and it broke right at the, where the boom hits the mast? So he said, Ad, get up there and sit on the boom. Well, the idea of it would be like sending Owen up to sit on this tremendous boom. Didn't do much good, but we ran before the storm and ended up by the Quarriers Island called Ragnarok. This is a time when we went over to Oak Island to pick blueberries, back in the days when there were blueberries on Oak Island. Everybody's just being silly. When I was in college, it was the fad was to wear sailor pants from the Army Navy store. That and these awful kind of, we call them beach pajamas. I had two marvelous pairs that burned up in the fire. They weren't any more becoming than what young people in college wear today. That, I think, is my friend Ananias Kaltenborn, whose father, H.V. Kaltenborn, was one of the famous newscasters. Well, no, I don't know. Then again, it may have been one of Si's friends up with her boyfriend. That is a little dog named Henry, which we got. In those days also of Prohibition, once a summer we would go over to Canada.
One.
Oh. He was a part of the Mankle family for many years. We sometimes had dogs at the island, but not as a regular thing. There we are, aquaplaning behind the Quarrier's Ragnarok. In those days, of course, boats were quite different, and you could tell who was coming by the sound of the motor, and everyone could tell the sound of the funny old Ragnarok. I don't know whether I think that is Cy, maybe it's Ad. I'm not sure who it is on that. But it's being driven by Fitzhugh Quarrier. This is Jean. I wanted to tell you more about the Quarriers. They lived on Ragnarok Island, and Old Man Quarrier, as he was known, had one of the loudest voices on the river. There is my mother she swam about twice a summer. It was quite an occasion, so I felt I should take her picture. And that is my Aunt Margie, who was the daughter of my father's sister. And it was through Aunt Margie, who was in college at Wells College with Mother, that Mother went up and finally met my father there at the island. That is Aunt Margie's husband, Tony, Uncle Tony Mankle. He was a lawyer, skilled in maritime law, and sometime a judge. There is a large group at the left on the map, Fitzhugh. Then there is Robbie McPherson, who came every summer to the Quarriers, a friend of Fitzhugh's. And behind is Frank Kennedy, who was my beau for various summers. He went to RPI and was in training to be an engineer. That is Tony Mankle. I think this must be after 1932 somehow, because Tony looks quite long-legged and fairly grown up. I graduated at the age of 20. In 1932, I was 21. Robbie McPherson we fancied as a diver. I don't know that he was all that good, but he was better than the rest of us. And in those days, we had quite a substantial raft, as you can see, with a good diving board. That is Fitzhugh. Fitzhugh was the youngest of the three Quarrier brothers. The oldest one, Archie, who died before I knew him, was famous for being on the Yale crew that went to the Olympics in 1928. His younger brother, Sidney, known as Red, bowed Margot around for a while. He was a big man on campus as a football star. He later married Eliza, who was a Quaker from Philadelphia. I'm still talking about the Quarrier family. And Sidney also was the spitting image of his father, red hair, a very loud voice, but he was a marvelous doctor and perfected some methods of treating burn victims in Hartford Hospital. He was the father of the three Quarrier boys, three Quarrier boys, who were Cindy's age, just enough ahead of her to ignore her. Aunt Margie and Uncle Tony loved to go out for a row after dinner in the quiet of the evening. Uncle Tony held a fishing rod, but I don't know that anything ever bit on the end of it. You see, in those days, we still had those nice chair seats that you could put in a canoe or a rowboat and really be comfortable. I think they eventually disintegrated. That is Fitzhugh Quarrier, who grew up to be with Bell Telephone Company. He is still alive, married. Oh, this is Margot and Louis Benton, who became a doctor in Ogdensburg. The Bentons were one of the few Catholic families we knew, and while it was considered odd to be a Catholic, it was not at all objectionable. Aren't those funny bathing suits? It was a year or two after that it became proper for men to go without tops. That, I'm sure, is Cy. In those days, guys didn't work and girls too. They didn't work in the summer. You just played during the 3 months of vacation. And it was considered a very nice place to come to the Morgan's Island, because there was always good company. The cook said Susie May was a marvelous cook. That's Tony Mankle, I think. And a group of boys from Toledo with whom I had gone to dancing school, who had then dropped down to dating or taking to parties, my younger sister's friends. See those beach pajamas? Aren't they something? The boys would come maybe 4 or 5 and stay 10 days or more. They didn't come to see any one particular person, but it was very nice. That is there's my mother at the left. What are we? Oh, I suppose some puppy. Oh, yes, now we have gotten. This is the house party that I had after I graduated from Wells. And on the way up, we purchased a puppy at a gas station. All the stupid things to do. We didn't really need a puppy. And he grew up to be a very stupid Springer Spaniel. But we had a great deal of fun with him at our house party. I had about 10 girls up for a week or so. And we had a great time, and it started rather a tradition. When Cy graduated from Wells, she had a house party. I can't even remember the name of the dog's name at this point. Mother is going out. That must have been one of our interim hired men for the summer who supposedly kept the boats polished up and drove Mother. Mother went twice a week to the town of Ogdensburg, 25 miles away, to grocery and occasionally have lunch with friends. She had lived there the first 2 or 3 years of her married life. And when you consider, there's for Frank again, Frank Kennedy. When you consider that Mother ran a household of about 15 to 20 people all summer with no freezer, she had to do a lot of that. Is the boat in which I spent many an evening. That is Frank Kennedy's long cigar with the hardest front seat. And they made up a silly song based on Frankie and Johnny thing, about Frankie and Ad, because Frank came every other night to take me riding. And the only line I remember he was studying to be an engineer and I was a chemistry major, which was considered very odd by our contemporaries. And one of the lines was, talk was of alternating currents and the photoelectric cell, which was Frank was a very silent man. There is the Peanut coming in. As I say, a great, big, unwieldy catboat. But it's what I learned to sail on. I think I think I did tell you about how we got caught in the White Squall. Well, that was one of my most vivid memories. I can't remember what happened to the peanut. Oh, yes, I do remember. We sold it to somebody on shore. They took the mast off and put a motor on the end of it, and it hung around the area for a long time. And we were without a sailboat for some years. This, as you can see, the water is very low this year. This was before the Eisenhower Lock was built, and the water was different every year. You never knew whether it would be up or down. And of course, as always, it did go down during the summer. You can see how shallow the whole bay was when we played this water baseball. I note also that Holly Kai has had a second story put on it. I have no recollection of what year that second story was built. The two little rooms it was a workshop downstairs with two little rooms for the hired man or men. I won't bother to try to identify most of these people. That's Hugh Jones with his back to the camera. That is Benny Cuthbert with the funny old-fashioned bathing suit. He was the father of Ellen Cuthbert Bird.
Which is the funny old-fashioned bathing suit?
The one with the straps up the back. Fitzhugh Quarrier again. He also still in an old-fashioned bathing suit. Benny Cuthbert, running to first base. Or no, I think he's doing a home run. I'm not sure. But it's pretty hard, as you know, to walk that fast in water up to your waist or your thighs. That, I think, was Sandy Spencer, who was, well, Cy fancied herself in love with him for some years. And he was the son of, that's Old Man Wood, father of Lauren. Fitzhugh Quarrier. Young Lauren Wood. The skinny one there, young Lauren Wood, catching the ball. Now, he is, of course, has died since. He is the father of all those many, many Woods. As I say, most of these people are now, if they're not dead, they are old men in their 80s. Oh, there is the first picture we had of the, no, it isn't the Getha, it's a Thousand Island sloop. And there were 4 of them. This, I'm not sure at what period. At one time there were 4, then there were just 2. This is the Woods boat, and the Baileys had one. And in those days we had a lot of sailing races, sometimes twice a week. Everybody sailed, and it was pretty exciting. That is Stu Burt with Betty Jean. Betty Jean Wood. No, Betty Jean Cuthbert Wood. So that's Stu Burt. The Burts rented a cottage for many, many years. This is a picnic on Bluff Island. We picnicked either on Bluff or on Chippewa Point. No, I take it back. That is not Bluff Island. It is Chokecherry, now owned by the Burts. As you can see, we moved as a group. There was very little, just, I think that is Adelaide. Aquaplaning. We have, I think, is that a real aquaplane or is that a shutter? We used a shutter for many years, but I think that's a real aquaplane. And I don't know what That is Pinky Dillingham, who was a good friend of mine for a good many years. If ever a man did not look like his nickname ought to be Pinky, that was Franklin Dillingham. And he lived in Ogdensburg and worked there. He had two subjects of conversation, horses and sailboats. And I used to go in, that's Joke Cherry in the background, I used to go in and ride or sail. He also took me to country club dances. And the country club, which of later years turned into a golf club, it was a funny little building, but we had interesting dances. It was the only place to dance there for a while during Prohibition, when everybody had a bottle out in the car, and you spent as much time in the parking lot as you did on the dance floor. But this, I believe, I'm not sure, is Chucky Benton, Louis Benton's younger brother, and Chucky became a Trappist monk. Of all unlikely people to turn to be a monk, as I told you earlier, they were Catholic. And he was the outside man for the monastery, so he did not retire totally. Now we shift. That is Cynthia as a baby, and her father, Mac, my first husband. And, as always, we thought she was adorable. Isn't she a funny-looking little thing? So we took a good deal, many pictures of her doing this and that. That is Hugh Jones, whom at that time Mother very much hoped might be her other son-in-law, but he did not. He and Cy did not decide to marry, and he married my good friend Jean McMillan instead. As you perhaps recall, Mac was killed in a train wreck on the New York Central line when we had only been married 3.5 years. Very shortly after this, well, this was summer, I guess, of 1939, probably. Cindy, yes. And Mac died in April the next spring. So Cindy was still just a toddler. That is Bill Lucas, married to my cousin Mary. That is me, yes. I would imagine at the age of 24 or 5, maybe 6. Late 20s anyway. I think we were able to, make the camera keep running long enough for me to get into it. Again, my mother with her grandchild. Mother died. Mother had cancer, and it was in remission for 2 years. And she died in 1940. Well, I don't know. She liked her first grandchild. I mean, was interested. Oh, dear me. Cindy, believe it or not, was terribly cute at about the age of 2 or 2.5. Of course, we felt every gesture was worthy of being immortalized in film. And I perhaps, in my enthusiasm, have saved more of it than I needed to. But we had always had kerosene lamps at the island, up until the time that Cindy was born, and my mother said she had raised a family on kerosene lamps, and she was not going to raise a grandchild, so she had electricity put in with a Delco battery. And that Cindy was born in 1938, so I guess for about that summer was when we got electricity. It was pretty marvelous. You see, smoking like chimneys, both of us. One did in those days. Mac was a very gregarious person. Things came alive. Almost any party went when he came to it. He worked for Libion's Ford Glass Company. He was a ceramic engineer. That is the only dog I've ever really liked. And I named him Hans. Mother and my father had had a red cocker at one time named Hans, so of course I just copied that. This is on the point of ozone. And of course, the original pictures, that was gorgeous blue water, not this faded blue that it shows here. But Hans was a lovely dog. Cy was always more fond of dogs than I was, having started as a child being absolutely terrified. We had very much the same people used to come every year. They were as fond of the island as we were. Hugh Jones, Cy, Mac, and I think my dear friends from college are apparently coming on the scene. I think they're around. There is Jean taking pictures, and Helen Nesbitt at the right. Jean and Helen were not married at that time. That was still back in the days when I wanted action, and people dreamed up foolish things to do. For the camera, yes. I don't know who I had taking that. I think that is our TI sloop, which Mother put forth the word that she would be interested in buying one, and Franklin Dillingham found one somewhere and helped negotiate for it. And we were very glad of it because we adored the Getha. Of course, it was old, as the TI sloops were. They were all made in the early part of the century. So ultimately, they had, I forget how many pounds of lead keel on the bottom. And eventually, the bottom did just rot, and The Getha had to be sunk. It was a very sad day when it was taken out in front of the island. Where it was. This is a pic. No, I think this. No, this isn't a picnic. I vowed after this picture I would never sit in that position again. It didn't look. It looked too naked. This is on a picnic. Mac and I went up Jones Creek, which was over in Canada. Just the two of us. You generally either towed a canoe or balanced it across the back of the wherry and steamed across the river. Then I guess we anchored the boat. I can't seem to remember because you had to paddle up Jones Creek. It was fairly shallow. I'm always glad I had these pictures because you can see how beautiful it was. But it was quite an expedition. We didn't do it very often. What is coming next? Oh my goodness, here we are back at Wells College. I expect it's my graduation. Yes, it would have been, and that is Jane Herman, who was the May Queen, and my dear friend Jane Webster Pierce, who was the May Queen's attendant. And this year, my senior year, was the year that my friend Inga Schumann came. It was an exchange student from Germany, and I think her picture is coming up. She's there. There's a picture of her shortly coming. Jane Herman on the left has not changed one iota in 50 years. That was my senior year roommate. That was Inga. And oh, she would be horrified to see a picture. She is the one with whom I have come. Inga is with the fur collar. She is the one with whom I have been close friends for all these years and whom I still talk to on the phone into Germany. That is my friend, my roommate Steve, who gave me up some years back when Wells would not take her daughter, who did not qualify. I think this is the boathouse at Wells College, where we used to go for picnics. And as you can see, everybody's wearing sailor pants and smoking. I won't bother to try to identify them. That's meaningless for most of you. But I think people are still having picnics at the boathouse at Wells College, and except for the cigarettes and the style of dress, I'm sure my mother was picnicking, if not at the boathouse itself, at least down there on the dock and the lake. That is Helen Weld Nesbitt. Her father, 2 years later, was president of Wells. And she married George Nesbitt, who was professor of English at Hamilton College for his entire lifetime and was one of the most beloved of teachers. I don't know why I didn't cut this. Except I suppose I wanted to see each that is me profile, and Steve and Stevenson. Oh yes, we gave our senior play. It was customary to give a Shakespearean play, and we gave Twelfth Night, and I played the part of Malvolio, cross-gartered and everything. That I think is Sir Toby Belch. We gave it outdoors, of course, up the hill on what was the outdoor basketball court. And one of the twins was Mary Lee Logan, sister of Josh Logan. That is Adelaide as Malvolio. You can always tell my legs, unfortunately. And I guess I was as good as could be expected. They divided the drama prize among 4 of us. So you can see I started my dramatic career way back. That was Mrs. Trent, our coach. And Dottie Meehan, who played the jester, is still writing to me. She is bedridden somewhere in Brooklyn with the husband that she went with in college. She married the guy she was going with and is still happily married to him. Jean Jones was the count. The one on the that is Margaret Dunham, who is, I still visit with her up in Maine. The lady in the long dress, unfortunately, was bedridden, set herself on fire, and died a long time ago. There are the twins. Mary Lee on the left, really one of my dearest friends. I still miss her. She became the travel editor of Life magazine and died shooting the rapids in British Columbia when she was only 63. Oh yes, now we go back up to the island again. We're always going to the island. I guess we were just as dumb as kids are today. Imagine picking up a dog at that point in our life. And I think we also had Ellen Hubner, with whom I have been doing elder hostels the last couple of years, my other German friend. That's Anais Kaltenborn, the daughter of H.V., the newscaster. Her family, her father and mother played tennis, we thought, well into their 70s, which we thought was marvelous. And Anais was always into something new, like modern dancing and so forth. She was very uninhibited. Ellen on the left, and that is Inge in the center. I think this is now this is Cy's baccalaureate. That is Al Ostrander from Seattle, with whom Cy and 4 friends drove across the country in an open touring car. They had great adventures all the way from New York through Ohio to Seattle. This is the faculty procession going into the Presbyterian Church, where baccalaureate services were always held. I don't know how I happen to have some movie film of this of 8mm, because I also had just gotten, on 16mm, I had just gotten a new 8mm movie camera where you had to reverse the little spools halfway through. This is making the circle to pass the diplomas around till you got your own. And I later took Cy's baccalaureate and then proceeded to take Jay and Jim Lou water skiing on the same film, which I guess I decided that is Mother, my sister, and me. Mother was a trustee of wells for a good many years. She eventually got off because she said everybody ought to have an end to their term. That is Al Ostrander, my sister Si's very, very good friend. She was president of student government. That is the guy that she married from home. That is my mother's dearest friend, Aunt Minna Putty, from the class of 1901. Oh, that was a piece in there of Gene Jones' wedding. This is Max and my honeymoon trip to, what's the name of that dam down in Kentucky? Tennessee Valley. They were just making it then, which must have been 1936. And we drove from Toledo, Ohio, to Florida in his darling little Chevy coupe. I think it was a Chevy coupe. And like all honeymoons, it was wonderful. Every day was nicer than the next. Yeah, that's the car we drove. And we must have proceeded past all this construction, but I have no recollection of it. This tape is certainly a mishmash of various kinds of things. The days when men wore hats. Ladies also. I guess you did get my smile or my teeth. You did get my smile or my teeth, Steve, do you think?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah, so we had this, well, this is the first time I must have gone to those springs and seen the glass-bottom boats. Because in the tape of the 50s, I was taking my 3 sons to do the same thing. 20 years later. Here we are at Daytona Beach. Mac wanted to show me the beach so that we could drive down on the sand. And last year, 1992, I went to the southern end of Daytona Beach to visit one of my childhood friends, whom there was a picture, had a picture later, friend from Toledo. Just let it ring. Oh, this is Jean McMillan Jones and Hugh Jones' wedding in Middleville, New York. And it was a very simple wedding. We walked from the church down through the little village. These are there as Adelaide as a bridesmaid, Helen Nesbitt at the far left, Hugh's sister Jane in the middle. And you see, bridesmaids really dressed up in those days. We had not just flowers, but long dresses, beautiful hats. And we went out in the field near Jean's aunt's house. I know that they have a wonderful formal picture of the wedding with cows in the background. But there in Middleville, I used to go home with Jean to her aunt's house for Thanksgiving and weekends and sort of things. And I called her Aunt Anthony as she did and felt very much at home there. Jean's grandfather had a tannery there. Oh, now this is down on Cape Cod at Bass River, where my Aunt Florence, my mother's younger sister, had this picturesque cottage. And last summer, again in 1992, I went down and tried to find the cottage at Bass River, and I couldn't even see it. It's been done over or added onto or something. This must have been when Aunt Florence early on had it moved from Osterville, because later the roses climbed all over the roof. Oh yes, it was Bass River is a small little river that comes in from the ocean. We were about half a mile back from the ocean. So we swam in the river, which of course had a current. Oh, that is. Well, there are roses on top of the roof. Maybe my sense of timing is off again here. But it was a very lovely little cottage. Very typical New England, had stairs that went almost straight up. Aunt Florence went every summer for years and years, and after she died, she willed it to another sister, the mother of Mary Husted Lucas, my Aunt Helen, who also went down there. And I remember visiting Aunt Helen when she was there with a companion in her 80s. This is a neighbor's hedge of something. But the Cape Cod that I knew then is certainly was far different, more peaceful, pleasanter than the Cape Cod now, because Bass River is only 3 miles from Hyannis and Hyannis Port, which is, well, this is Aunt Florence's friend Helen Irwin, a decorator from New York, who did all of our curtains, decorated both Si's and my beginning apartments. It seems hard to believe now that it was customary for the bride's parents to outfit one's beginning house or housekeeping. And Mac and I were given all the furniture for a 2-bedroom apartment with living room, dining room, breakfast nook, sun porch, which we rented for $50 a month. And when Si and Sam were married in 1940, they got the same sort of beginning housekeeping setup. I guess that is the end of the tape. Well, at this point, I've changed locations so many times that I don't know what subject I should talk further on. So I will stop.